don't waste your money trying to drive people to an online service. The conversion, and I don't mean that from like a spiritual term as much
Right.
as the ability to even get somebody's name off an online service is so hard
Yeah.
because they don't know you, they don't trust you, you're not engaging with them, and so they've got no reason to give you any of that information.
Hey, this is Micah with From the Garoffice, a podcast where I talk about how churches are using digital for the mission and kingdom of God. And today I have a real special conversation with Jeff Reed from Stadia Church Planting Network. He has been put in charge of helping church planters and churches that are also already existing and how they can either be Phygital, which means digital and physical, or digital only. So this is a fascinating conversation. I hope that it helps you, and if it does, please consider subscribing. And if you need any help, if you'd like me to connect you with someone, if there's something I can do for you, please let me know. God bless, and I hope you enjoy.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for hanging out with me today for a little bit. This is From the Garoffice with Micah Foster. This is Jeff Reed from Stadia Church Planting Network, and he leads a new part of what they're doing. So, Jeff, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so I came on staff with Stadia back in January, maybe 6 weeks before COVID hit.
Wow.
My title is literally Director of Digital Church Planting. So my job is to plant digital churches. Now, in this COVID season, we're doing a lot of, there's hundreds of thousands of churches that previously existed in physical space, and now they're doing digital ministry. And so
Right.
we use the term for that Phygital. We're helping the churches figure out how to use the strength of physical, the strength of digital, combine it together to be Phygital, Phygital. But really, like my passion is this completely other idea. And even with church planners, there's different levels of digital churches where there's a digital first church. Right now, if a guy wants to plant a church, I've got a friend that wants to plant Easter 2021. And so he's looking at his church launching digitally first in this season to one day be a physical church. There's this idea of digital next, where churches are maybe surviving, but not really in this COVID season. They're not going to be able to afford their buildings or staff, or like many churches, like I gather with yours, where you're previously in a school or a location and aren't able to get the lease, so you don't have a church home. We call those guys digital next, where their next expression of church is going to be in a digital shape, and we'll see what time we'll do. But really my passion and what we're spending a lot of time with is this idea of digital only, where we're looking at digital community as a community to put church in. And we're having conversations about Twitter as an unreached people group, and what does it take to do ministry for a planner to go into Twitter, to Facebook, to YouTube, to virtual reality. What does it look like to be a gamer church, literally doing evangelism and disciple making and utilizing the games themselves as a front door to tie into platforms like Discord and what have you. And so there's a really fascinating conversation, regardless of your application, but digital church, obviously, in this COVID season is becoming very popular.
Now, that's really interesting. You mentioned a couple of things. First of all, Twitter has had its ups and downs, right? So as a platform, a lot of people jumped on, what was it, 2007, 8? I can't remember. I jumped on right away. I think everyone had their first tweet. So it was like, this is my first tweet. And everyone was like, I don't know what to do with this. So you just told people what you had for lunch, and you posted grainy pictures from your BlackBerry Pearl. And it was just, it was weird, right? But it's grown, and all these platforms have grown into their own kind of identities in this online stuff. And so I'm really interested in people utilizing different stuff. We've talked about on this podcast, we've had different people who are doing digital ministry on these different platforms. So there's a pastor who's a gaming pastor, right? Pastor Susie, and he's been doing this for several years. They were about to launch a physical campus right before this hit. That would also be like a gaming place. And,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just really interesting to see how this works together. I think one of the last episodes I had was a guy who's planting right now, and he's using Instagram. That's his deal. So he's doing Instagram lives. I know another guy who's been doing Instagram live for a couple of years now. He's in Hawaii. So there's people doing this, and now we're all forced, I think, to think about the possibility of these in a way that perhaps we didn't think about them before, as viable options for ministry. Because, for many of us, we've kind of said, that's not really ministry, or kind of pushed that off to the side. And so I'm curious, and people can probably predict this, but what is the pushback you're getting from the church or at large? What are the main things that are kind of oppositional to this approach?
Yeah, the challenge is basically not abandoning gathering together. I mean, that's really kind of the biblical challenge. I think that people interpret it being physically. Now, I had a pastor sat down with the creative director, connected me with the lead pastor of this church. This is pre-COVID, maybe October of 2019. And so the creative director wanted me to convince the pastor to start streaming services. And the pastor, looks me in the eyes and says, Jeff, I actually believe that you're sinning. You're taking people out of the body of Christ, the bride, his church. We will never broadcast our services out of this church. And I didn't hear from that pastor from about 6 months. Until about the third weekend of March 2020, that pastor calls me up on my cell phone on a Saturday, essentially begging for help because COVID is here, and they will have no method for doing anything unless they can figure out how to broadcast. So, a lot of those theological opinions actually became more opinions than theologically based. And so whether it is or isn't, actually I had a pastor the other day tell me that, hey, you know what, in this season, I do, Jeff, I think that digital church is okay for this season. But as soon as we get back to the building, we need to get back to the building because it's not okay long-term, but it's okay for this season. And even that, I'm like, the lukewarmness of that. I mean, doesn't Jesus say something like, pick side one, or it's a Revelation, pick side one, pick the other? But this lukewarmness, I want to spit out of the mouth. Like, if you're so bold as to say you don't agree with the idea of digital, then like don't agree with it and hold to that and figure out, drive up church, micro locations. There are still ways to do church in the season. There are other options than just digital. They're all methods towards it. But if you believe strongly enough that, or if you're open to the idea, then embrace it and run with this idea of digital. And honestly, I've loved in this season where churches seem to embrace the idea theologically. I think the biggest thing that I've seen is that churches are struggling to balance the call of, okay, what am I supposed to do physical? Because I had a full-time job physically before this COVID thing hit. And over the past 20 plus weeks, whatever it's been, I have this idea of how to do my job digitally. But now you want me to do both at the same time. I don't have that. And so churches are trying to reconcile what a new normal would look like if it was physical as well as digital.
Yeah. And that also brings up in me, like right now we have the possibility of reaching people who are far from our community that we're physically at. So if that were to happen, if there was to be, let's say, just random people who somehow connect with what we're doing, and we're able to get them connected into the community of the church digitally, then if we go back to physical, how are we still serving those people? And does that mean, hey, we'll help you find a physical church in your area? Like, what does that look like? And so for me, that's a real question in my mind. So on top of that, I start to ask, okay, so how do we reach new people? And do they all need to be in our area, just in case we gather at some point, so there's this kind of muddiness about it, because you don't want to leave people high and dry. Oh, sorry, we can go back to normal. So I get, this was a good run. See you later. I don't like that. That feels icky to me. So in your experience of the people you're having conversations with, and the people you're working with, are they focusing on a geographic area as well as a platform, or is their geographic area their platform, or how does that work?
Well, the answer to that is all of the above. Like, and really that's the great thing, I think, coming out of this COVID season.
Mm-hmm.
Every church playbook, every strategy, every rule book, every organization, every guy who's like, I've got the perfect plan to help your individual church grow. Every book. I used to own a Christian bookstore. It's all gone away. Like, COVID changed every rule. Now,
Mm-hmm.
some people were kind of guessing and could have predicted, not necessarily COVID, but the
Mm-hmm.
move towards
Right.
digital. But really, at this point, culture has accelerated and shifted so much that really it's up to the church to decide, hey, do you value community outside of the 30-mile radius of your church, or would you rather get them connected to a church in their neighborhood? And I can tell you, there are very powerful, influential churches that do things digitally that can make their own decision. Just even in California, you got Saddleback, who's very digitally minded, but all their digital drives towards physical locations, even to the point of micro locations where they're doing home gatherings, where they're training people to do church in their community and are helping create little small pockets of Saddleback all over the country. The exact opposite approach is that with Church Home, which is not also in California and in San Francisco with that, but they're doing church on mobile app. And yes, while they want people to meet together physically, they're saying, hey, if you just want to be on our mobile app and you want this to be your church, we can do that for you, and we can be your church via mobile app. And so it's two completely different approaches. Both are valid,
Right.
especially in context of the end game of creating a disciple through the tools.
Yeah. I'm very curious about that micro thing, right? We're a small church, so I already think about those micro things, because relationally, I feel like you can do a lot that way. So a curious thought is, what if you targeted one community? You said, hey, and really you're thinking like, hey, I've got you mentioned the college roommate someone hadn't talked to in a long time. Okay, we've got someone who moved here several years ago from Maryland or in California. It's a long ways, but she's got friends that sometimes will watch our services because she shares it on her timeline and stuff in Facebook. And so I have this curious idea of, what if a couple of her friends started watching together, and then you could target that area and say, hey, we've got a couple of people who are in your community who watch our services together. We'd love to connect you. If you're interested, you want, just sort of try to create opportunities for people to connect with other people in their community. And I feel like that's really messy too, because it's hard to get to know people really, unless you're spending a lot of time with people, and people can put on a front, and people can, there's a lot of things. So I feel like it's really messy, but that's okay. I think messy's okay.
Well, yeah, but even like, let's take it a step further.
Yeah.
Talk about your college friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she's out, she's reaching her circle of influence. Let's say she's got 10 people within her apartment complex she's talking to, and she's friends with. What does it look like if you empowered her to reach those 10? What happens when she reaches one, and now that second person's got another 10? Now there's 20 potential reach there in the city. Now, I think the challenge of the church in the physical mindset is, I need to know all 20 of these people.
Sure,
I need to be the one, as the pastor, who's building the relationships and taking the weight of it myself, to really get to know these people relationally, even though they're in another state. and I think that's really the mistake, because what I would suggest we need to really do is empower that initial girl and train her, develop her, disciple her to the place where she can operate at that level. I mean, really, if you're talking micro locations, you're talking digital church, church online. I mean, pretty soon you've got this idea of priesthood of all believers coming up, where, you know, the online, the digital church is not a building for all of us to gather in. I think it's much more effective if it's a distribution network that's sending us out. And as a result of that, I mean, it's the starfish versus spider kind of mentality here, and having the awareness of, let's develop something that's scalable. Let's develop something that's repeatable. Let's develop something that's relational. I mean, yes, maybe there are some services that need to be provided pastorally for counseling and things like that. But really, I at least for myself in my online ministry, I've had more success challenging those people. Hey, when those difficult conversations come up about, you know, about divorce, here's what the Bible says. Let me teach you so you can teach others. And what happens is you're really helping these micro locations grow spiritually. And as the tides rise, so does all the other boats that are connected with it. There's for me, this idea of micro locations and church online gets really interesting, because I believe I think that's the future of small growth here in America.
I mean, it feels a little like the church Francis Chan had a start in San Francisco, right? Where there's a church in all these buildings, basically, right? A church that's a small group that meets in all these apartments and all these buildings. And then for them, I think it was once a month or so, they would meet together and have a worship gathering together where he would teach, or someone from the people he was training would teach. And that's very interesting as well. Really respect what they did and what he left to start that. So that's very, very interesting. I love having these conversations. I just think that these are very scary conversations for many of us, especially if we work in the church and we're like, well, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for my position? Or what does that mean for this person's position? And how do we staff towards that? And all those kinds of things. And I think the disruption to the normal of what people expect, what they feel like works based on their past experience. I mean, the idea of youth group, right? How old is that idea? It's really not that old, but it's become a mainstay, and it's become a big thing that is a caliber or a way to judge whether you have an effective ministry or church. How big is your youth group? I totally understand reaching students. I was a student ministry pastor for years. I get that. And so now, how does this disrupt that is another question that people have. Go ahead. You're going to say something.
Well, yeah, but even take the youth group model. And I was a youth guy as well. And I've been incredibly impacted by the youth ministers in my life. I could name them on the podcast.
That's right.
Do that. But the reality is, was it effective? Like there are one-off success stories, but how many stories do you need to hear of the guys who fall away in college in the 20s and the 30s where it doesn't cement and regiment through? And so once again, and I don't want to like totally rip the Band-Aid off here, but was the model working before COVID? And if it was, if the end game is we're creating this idea of a healthy disciple maker, then let's continue it on. But I think a lot of the things that we were really doing, I don't know that it was really being effective. Yes, we've got industries built around it. We've got peoples whose jobs are this. We've got peoples whose livelihoods and paychecks were come out through this. But when it really comes down to, is it being effective in creating those disciple makers? Culturally, much of what we were as a church were doing, we were falling short. And this idea of, well, the church has to have a children's ministry. I work for an organization that where the title, the motto of Stadia is literally until every child has a church. I understand the huge value of having churches to reach children. But nowhere in Scripture does it say that children's ministry is the way. It doesn't even talk about it. Children's ministry actually came up, I believe, in the 50s or 60s. And so it's really come down to, at least how I look at the Bible, how I look at the church for tomorrow, redefining what the way that we do church is. Not necessarily holding to an old paradigm, an old model that may or may not even work in mid-COVID, much less post-COVID, but going back to Scripture and creating new ideas that relationally work within the context of who people are today and our ability to reach them. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the challenges we've been struggling with, because a lot of our church is young families with young kids. I've got 3 kids. Like everyone on our initial launch team had babies around the same time. You know, like there's a built-in, what are we doing for the kids in what we're doing? And so we've had to kind of try to create opportunities or point people to what, Rethink and the Orange curriculum are doing online for people. We watch as a family on Sundays. We watch something called the So and So Show from Rethink Group. It's geared towards the older elementary age kids, and I laugh. I think it's fun and funny. And then there's a question, and we try to discuss it as a family. So I'm really trying to encourage parents, like, hey, you're your kid's small group leader right now. Like, take advantage of this time and build into them, because tag, you're it. And newsflash, you were always it. So I think that's the real challenge is, and many people have talked about this. If you want your son to be good at baseball, you get him some lessons from a professional of some kind or a coach of some kind. You take him to a professional. If you want your daughter to learn piano, my daughter's in piano right now, that's why I picked that. And you take them to someone who can teach piano, and then automatically we go, if you want your kid to be a Jesus follower, you take him to a professional Jesus follower. And that's not the way of Jesus, because all of us who follow Jesus should be able to raise our kids in that. So that's part of what we're trying to help and struggle through, and also teach people to use those resources. I think, and maybe you've seen this, but what people have been talking about for years, how families are so crazy busy, how we've become more mobile. A lot of people in our community love to leave on the weekend. They love to go to the mountains or the beach. So we're right in the middle of both. You can drive a couple hours out of the way, and if you stay here, you're just gonna be hot because it's 100 plus all summer long. And so people get out of town. And so that's been a real struggle in the past in the summers, because a lot of people disperse on the weekend when service is. And so it's been a challenge. Now, in this time, I'm like, yeah, go to the beach, go to the mountains. We'll see you online. Yeah. It doesn't cause it. Before it would cause like angst in me, like, oh my gosh, they're leaving again. They're going again. They're going to be gone all summer. And right now I'm like, yeah, go have fun. And we'll have service online if you want to catch up. I'd love to see you in our Zoom group, whatever. And I don't have any of that, like, either jealousy or what does this mean for setup and tear down, and how does this affect, because there's a little bit of that in you as a church planter. You're like, I need people here to pull this off. And I don't have any of that right now, which I love. So it's a lot freeing. It's very freeing to be doing ministry like this right now in those regards. Have you noticed any of that with anybody else?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because what's really happening in this season is the churches are learning. They're learning that the ministry is more than the 1 hour on Sunday. Pre-COVID, though, we were defining the success of our church based on that 1 hour on Sunday. Mm-hmm. How many seats were filled, and was it up or down from last week, last month, or even 12 months ago, year out? Mm-hmm. What are those trends? I actually had a church tell me, Ali Ruhi is a church planner in California. A lot of my stories are California based. It's not That's unique.
Those were crazy.
But Ali actually tells me the story of where he actually feels like his church is healthier in this COVID season because he's realized, wait, it's more than just the 1 hour on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen my online groups attendance triple. I've seen giving go up 20-30%, something like that.
Wow.
Like things are trending up. Yes, my online broadcast is down. Nobody seems to care about that. But if I'm looking at the other metrics, if I'm looking at how people are spiritually growing and developing, he's discovering that the service being the center focus, well, it just wasn't working for his church. And really, when he went back and looked at his decrease in attendance, even going back to 2019, he realized, man, the service model just wasn't reaching my people. And so the idea of going digital actually brought out the relational aspects, which encouraged more disciple making, which made it a healthier church experience. Even by biblical context, where he is at a church now is much healthier than he was, because COVID forced him to let go of this idea of a physical church building or a physical church service. I actually had a planner tell me the other day, a guy here in Miami, he's like, thank God for COVID. It made me go digital. I was wanting to go digital anyway. The people were really struggling with it. And now that we're in digital, no physical, man, I don't want to go back to physical. I want to stay digital the way that I am. That's how we're able to do ministry. That's how we're effectively reaching people, not by trying to do some setup and tear down.
Right.
And what's interesting, even by saying that, because I've had these conversations with planners, I tell them these stories and they're like, but man, that isn't what God called me to do. That isn't what I signed up for. That isn't, because in their hearts, they've always known this other model. They've always had the joy of standing up on a stage in front of X number of people. And it's like, that's where I get my identity. That's where I get my personal satisfaction. That's where I feel the most joy, blah, 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 whatever the context. And I don't want to over spiritualize or under spiritualize any of this as much as to say, if the method's effective, let's keep using it. The day, and I promise you this on this podcast, the day that digital is not effective and they come out with whatever the next thing is, I will change everything about me and I'll go figure out the other one, because physical and digital are just methods towards this idea. And so even butts and seats, counting, measuring that success, if that's effective in creating that disciple maker, great. But I don't think that it was. So why wouldn't we change? Like it's time. This is the opportunity we have that God's brought us for. He's in control of this situation. Never in the Bible did God break something only to put it back together exactly the way that it was. He did not run Job through the misery of Job's life and then resurrect everybody, bring everybody back and give. No, there were changes through the season. And so in this season, there's lessons to be learned. And it's not a matter of getting back to the way that it was. It's a matter of using this as the reason to change, acknowledge a new direction, and go forward with that.
Absolutely. I was also talking with some of our leadership team last night. We have a Zoom call on Monday nights where we kind of digest some stuff, talk through some things, and pray together. And the question I had for them, and I wanted some feedback and ideas. What do you guys think? How can we create more community in this time? And I think in my head, I was assuming them to say, well, we need a Zoom call every night so that we have all the options, and we'll connect people into those, and then those will be small groups and blah, 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 because that's just kind of, I think, the logical part of my brain just runs down that trail. And all of them gave like one-off connecting opportunities, ideas. They were one-offs, non-committal, one-off opportunities for people. Hey, what if we told everyone to order dinner from the same restaurant or chain or whatever, and then we have a dinner party virtually, and everybody's eating their food, and it's from the same restaurant or the same kind of food. We have a theme or whatever, and we can play a couple games, or a connection opportunity that's virtual, but it's just a one-off, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with where they're at in life right now and where people are at in life right now. They don't know what next week looks like. And so they don't want to commit to, hey, yeah, I'll be in this small group every week for 6 weeks even. They don't want to do that because they're not sure what next week looks like. And for us, we really don't know what next week looks like because next week starts distance learning school for us. And we, though we did it for a few months at the back end of the school year, it's going to look different because I've had all summer to organize and figure out how to do this differently. And so now our kids are going to be on block schedule, which means they're going to have 5 hours of Zoom every day, all three kids. And so I'm sitting here going, how are we going to do that? Like they're all supposed to be on Zoom at the same time every day for 5 hours. Now they're broken up and there's breaks, but like I've got a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old, first, third, and fifth grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I can guarantee you, at least my fifth grader, he can do everything on his own. He's savvy. My first and third grade, they're going to need mom and dad with them, helping them like all week, at least for the first week. And I'm not sure how we're going to get our jobs done. We both work full time. Yeah. It's like, so I'm just looking at my life going, I don't know what my week looks like for the coming weeks. So I know people are having those, and people who are teachers and have kids are trying to figure out how they're going to do their job and help their kids do their distance learning. So there's a lot of things up in the air. So the idea, I think, of committing to anything is off the table for most people at this point. And so just trying to create, okay, how can we say, a few weeks from now, not even next week, how can we create some opportunities for people just to jump in for a little bit, connect with one another relationally, and jump out without any commitment? How have you seen people, are other people struggling with this commitment thing? And all that kind of stuff?
Well, and it comes down to, let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. How do you boil a frog? Do you know this? How do you boil a frog?
Gradually.
Gradually, one degree at a time. And that's the approach in digital ministry and doing digital church, because people can exit out if they don't trust mm-hmm. you, if they don't like you. And so like, it's very easy. It's not a captive audience like mm-hmm. it is physically. And so that's where the relationship comes in. Ask more questions. It's much more effective in the season to ask questions than to make statements. Mm-hmm. And Twitter is a great example of that, where you can make a statement on Twitter, where Twitter is so cancel culture and so everybody's yelling at each other. Facebook's not that far away. Make a statement about masks or race, and you're going to rip the Band-Aid off and it's going to go flying. Mm-hmm. Instead of taking a statement culture, what if we're asking questions and we're dialoguing? What if we're learning from one another? We're starting to build a relationship through the conversation. And with that conversation comes more trust. Mm-hmm. Like it's funny, you told earlier about the idea of the connection cards. You want me, I don't know who you are, mm-hmm. and you want me to give you my email address or my phone number, and you're a church, but I'm not really a church type person. I'm not going to give you my cell phone number.
Right.
Like that's there's some things that are sacred, and cell phones and email addresses are. Now, what's not is actually Facebook Messenger,
right? Where
Facebook Messenger right now in culture is the best open rate of any of the platforms. 80 to 85% of your Facebook messages will be opened. Email is like 20 to 30%. Mm-hmm. Text is much lower than that. For some reason, Facebook Messenger is really working. And what we're seeing, and I can give you names of churches that are utilizing Facebook Messenger to connect with people in cold space and build community through it. Like Patrick Holden, he's planning a church in I want to say Columbus, Ohio. It's in the Ohio area. And he built his core team off of going into community Facebook groups and just building relationships with people.
Wow.
Asking them questions in the Facebook groups, engaging, liking, commenting, starting to message people through Facebook Messenger to continue to build that relationship. No church service, just relationally connecting through these social media tools, listening, learning about people, and through that, building the relationship. This is the approach. It's funny. You said the idea of like playing video or not even video games, just playing games online. We're actually doing a podcast on that soon, because the idea of, hey, let's play board games together. And through that board game, actually build a relate. I mean, you laugh, but it's a thing. And there are churches that are using that simple tool as a way to build relationships. Now, does that work in physical space? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it doesn't matter whether it works physical. There are churches that are seeing success in it digitally, and that may be a method for us to start to discover more people who need Christ, and build relationships with those people.
Yeah, I like that. I have some friends who do that. They live in San Francisco, and they have people they connect with. I think they have a weekly board game night that they do, like a Zoom board game group with. I also have, there's another woman in our church who was telling me that she has a group, a book club, basically. They used to meet in person, and now they meet online. And so it's like books and beverages or something like that. And so everyone brings a beer or something, and they talk about their book, but they do it online. And now, I guess a lot of their, what brought them together was this book idea, but now it's more connecting. And what I found, even in our small group that's on Zoom, when we first started, it was very programmed. It was very like, okay, jump on, we're going to watch this 15 minutes together. Then we're going to talk about, these questions that are already prescribed, and then we'll do prayer requests. And what I found was, I didn't like it. And I don't think half the people liked it either. They're like, I can watch anything I want on my own. Can we just talk? And so now it's like, I just bring a little passage, maybe one question, and the rest of it is where it needs to go, wherever it needs to go. So someone's having a hard day, someone lost their job, someone's got an interview. It's a lot more natural, I think, conversation than it used to be. It used to be very prescribed. And so we've moved away from curriculum to community. And I think that's probably a big thing that's happening for a lot of people. And I think having the ability to meet together has taken away for many people. I think that has accelerated how we're using digital connection tools. And of course, there's a part of me that's like, well, as soon as people can have parties in their home again with unlimited amounts of people, that aspect may go away. And so there's that too. Who knows what's going to happen after.
Well, I tell you what, I want you to look up a church, because in your specific use case, I think this is one that's similar to you. It's First Capital Christian Church in Corydon, Indiana, and so they had an online ministry for a while that they just spun off to be a digital only church with micro locations, and so it's at churchanywhere.us, I believe. With that, Tyler Sansom was the engagement pastor at First Capital. He's now the lead pastor of Church Anywhere. Okay. But what this particular church was able to do was they, through their online broadcasts and through the physical church, they would connect with people, with leaders, with people who had a calling and were felt led towards disciple making. So they took them through. I think they used Rooted. Yeah, they used Rooted. Okay. Rooted, it comes out of Mariners Church for their discipleship curriculum. Now, Mariners, Rooted is just an example. There's tons of other ones. I don't want to say there's nothing special about Rooted, but they're all really good. But through that process, they train these people basically to be the volunteer campus pastors of these micro locations. literally, I think they've got 20 micro locations at this point across the country. Majority
awesome.
of them are near Corden, Indiana.
Sure.
But where they put them, hospital rehab centers, orphanages, after-school daycare centers. They're running 3 or 4 prison ministries at this point out of it. They've got, they do some in homes. They've got some all the way from Indiana all the way to Rhode Island. It's crazy. So the reach is good. They're discipling people over long distance nearby. But when it comes to staffing, it's not paid.
Right.
They're volunteers, shepherds who are caring for the people who are in these churches. And I've heard stories of like it's Huntington's disease, where at the rehab center the people aren't even capable of standing up in worship unless someone's like 2 people are holding them by the elbows to get them in the up position, where they're worshiping, they're connecting to God. The person was a former RN who's leading that, so she has a heart for the people and knows how to care for. And really, what Church Anywhere has done is they figured out, hey, I want to empower you guys to do the ministry. It's church's platform. We talk about this a lot, where, hey, we're not going to do the church service. We're going to empower you guys to be the church out there. Do services, great, like I said before, priesthood of all believers, but also like engage with the people, learn what they need, figure out how best to reach them, build those relationships, not for the church sake, but for the sake of the kingdom, and be that disciple maker that God's called us to be. And so right now, what you're describing, man, a Church Anywhere would be a great example for you to dig into.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard of Church Anywhere, and I watched the podcast you mentioned earlier with the pastor in California, who's healthier now than pre-COVID. And so all that is so good. I'm so thankful that there are people like you guys who are putting out this stuff and finding and mining these stories so that you can share them with other people, inspire other people, and help them figure some stuff out. Because man, it's such a strange time, uncharted territories for sure. But I just keep thinking about like when Paul wrote the epistles, and they circulated. That was like content, but there were different communities that utilized that in their context and applied that to their life, and we still do it today. And so we think, like, I love the idea that if we have something helpful and we put it online and it's viewable on demand, it has a shelf life that's longer than if we just talked to a certain amount of people in a room. Now, it may not always be this. The applications of what we say may not always be the same, the specific way that it's used, because culture moves on, time moves on, technology changes. But like I had we did an interview with a police officer who's a part of our church. We started a podcast telling stories of people in our church. And he's a police officer. He's also African-American. And so this was in the midst of Black Lives Matter protests, all that, when that was at its height, at least as perceived by our community here. And so I sat down with him and had a conversation about all that, his perspective, his experience being both African-American and a police officer. And that we used that in place of our message on a Sunday. And people are still sharing that with people. They're having a conversation with a friend and they're talking about this whole thing and what should our response be and how should we engage with that. And they're like, well, I don't really know all the specifics of what we should do, but this was a good conversation. You should watch this. And so I love that something that we had, a conversation with this guy for an hour in his home, and then it's helping people trickling down the road, I guess. Whereas when we were strictly physical, I could have brought him in front. It would have been really helpful for the people in the room. We would have slapped it online, but it would have been a bad presentation because it was really meant for the people in the room, and we're just slapping it online. And so no one would have watched it. And that was the majority of what we slapped online, because it was like, oh, here's the message, you can catch up. In the back of my mind, I'm like, but I know you won't, because it's not made for that screen. And so you just disengage right away.
Yep.
So anyway, I love the shelf life is longer and all that kind of stuff. Man, this is really helpful. I love the idea there with Church Anywhere, and I'm going to definitely check that out. Any last minute things you would say to anyone who's, thinking about where do we go from here? We're kind of stuck. I know a lot of people are, like I mentioned before with you, they're fighting to get back in their buildings. They're fighting to have services. They're doing outdoor services. You mentioned micro locations. There's a lot of stuff people can do if they have a physical place or amount of people who would engage with that stuff. But perhaps with churches that maybe don't have that ability or are not interested in that, or feel like God's calling them to something different, what would you say to them in this season?
I think that church overall is going to change. I think that post-COVID, we're going to see different expressions of church show up. I think that people are going to become more creative. I think even just as us as a Stadia, as an organization, we've even pre-COVID, but especially now since, we've been far more open to different expressions and different styles of church, because really, like, the U.S. model that you see is a type of church, and not to say that it's the biblical definition of church. It's not. It's funny you mentioned Francis Chan earlier. Francis Chan's written about that a bunch. At some point, he's like, if an alien were to come down on a deserted island, literally like a spaceship alien, and read the Bible, and somehow he were to end up in California and look at a church over in California, he would not recognize the church in California as the organization church that he read in the Bible. It's a very convoluted story. I think it's in Letters of the Church, in the introduction, letters from the church. But it comes down to this fact of, where are we getting our grounding from? Let's not just follow the opinions and the trends and the quote unquote pre-COVID standards that really were struggling, if we're honest with ourselves, for years before. What if we instead tried to do something new? And it's in that newness, some of these crazy ideas that we may be having, let's give them a try. Let's explore. Let's experiment. Let's run it through a beta test. Let's try in this season. And to me, I think that's the difference. That's one of the lessons that we need to learn, is this: we need to try. I had a guy, I'm blank. His name's Philip. Philip from the Philippines. Philip's 23 years old. Hits me up. I'm not kidding at all. I can show you the email. It's Philip from the Philippines. He hits me up, and I jump on a Zoom call. He's literally 12 hours opposite from me. So I'm talking to him at like 9 o'clock in the morning. It's 9 o'clock his time at night. And he starts pitching me this idea. He doesn't know me from Adam. He Googled me, but he came down to this place of, he wants to plant a digital church. And I'm blown away by this, and listening to some of his ideas. He's put some really good, interesting thought into this. Philip has. And at some point, finally, I'm like, hey, where did this idea come from? And he's like, it's just in my head. I've just been thinking. He wanted to reach creatives in the Philippines, like graphic artists, video editors, that point. And he had like a multi-year strategy designed towards doing this. And this is the truth. He's and I was like, did you have anybody helping you? No. Did you talk to anybody? No. Did you look at other examples? Like, no, it's just all, it was just in my head. I started writing it down. And I was like, well, how did you find me? Like, how did you get connected to me? And he's like, I Googled plant a digital church, and you were the only thing to show up. And because no one else was pre-COVID was really thinking or working on this. And that's kind of sad, But it's justifying for me that there are guys like Philip that are out there, even though it's in a different country, who's willing to take a risk and try something different. Because the type of person that Philip's going to reach in the Philippines is going to be different than the type of person that Philippines brick and mortar churches are going to reach. The different methods that we use are God will use to break down different people's defense mechanisms and get them connected. Not every church is going to be digital only. Not every person is going to connect to a digital only church. Not every church needs to move digital only, at least not in this season, but the pendulum's shifting more that way. And so church, I beg you, whether you're a planter just getting started, wanting to do something radical like digital only, or you're an existing physical church, there are lessons that you need to learn in this season. And if it's, hell man, I just want to go back to the way that it was, pre-COVID for the church does not exist anymore. It will not. Culture is shifting so much around us that even where you were March, April, February 2020 is not possible. And so learn things, be flexible, be ready to let go of the way that you used to do ministry and start to embrace a new idea, whether it's Phygital, digital only, digital first. I mean, there's so much, but all of it means you have to change the way that you were. You got to let it go.
That's good. That's good. I know there's a lot of people struggling with that right now. I know it. But I think we'll be better for it if we do let go of some things and we try to get to the bottom of what's the root of our call, what is the non-negotiables, and then go from there, right? If we find our non-negotiables and go from there, that'll really help us and set us up for flexibility in all the other areas. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time with me and sharing with me what's going on at Stadia and people you're working with and talking to. I know there's going to be people who hear this and it's helpful to them. They may reach out to you. I don't know, but I'm going to continue watching, reading, digesting, trying things, seeing what's going on and seeing what's working and what's not. And I think I want to encourage anybody who's listening and trying things, please let us know when it does not work as well as when it does, because we want to know the failures as well as the successes. That's how we're going to grow and move on in this. Well, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Well, I hope you got as much value out of that conversation as I did. I know that we are digesting a lot of things as a leadership team at Two Cities Church and considering a lot of different possibilities for what the future looks like. And that can be really scary, but it's also very exciting. So I hope that this was helpful to you. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next one.